Hello and welcome to an introduction to adverse childhood experiences, commonly known as ACEs. My name is Laura Tranter and I'm the Community Engagement Lead for the ACEs Support Hub in Wales. Just to give you a bit of context, the ACE Support Hub was established in March 2017 following the groundswell of interest in ACEs that had resulted from reports published demonstrating the findings from Public Health Wales' National Survey of the Prevalence and Impact of ACEs in Wales. The ACE Support Hub is directly funded by Welsh Government to create an environment for large-scale, whole-system transformation. Our mission is to enable and support organisations and communities in making changes that make Wales a world leader in preventing, mitigating and tackling ACEs and their significant impact. We aim to challenge and transform ways of working and create a societal shift in order to break the long-term cycle of ACEs, adversity and trauma. The ACE Support Hub was established under Cymru Well Wales and has funding from Welsh Government and support from Cymru Well Wales partners. The mission of the Hub is to help prevent ACEs from occurring, enable protective factors and to build resilience. We have a range of training packages, resources, toolkits and guides to help towards increasing ACE awareness, embedding trauma-informed practice and driving transformational change. Please get in touch with us if you'd like more information. During the session, I will be covering brain development in the early years, stress and the trauma response, what are ACEs, ACEs studies in Wales, exposure, prevalence and the increased risk, ACEs across the life course, preventing, mitigating and tackling ACEs. Brain development in the early years. A baby's brain grows from 25% to 80% of its adult size during the first 2 years. The first 1,000 days are critical. Although there are opportunities across childhood and adolescence, our focus to build strong foundations should be in the first 1,000 days. And the quality of a child's experience in the early years of life, whether positive or negative, shapes how their brain develops. This video explains how experiences in the first years of our lives affect how our brains form. Science tells us that the stress of abuse or neglect can damage the basic structures of a child's developing brain, and without the right help, it can put them at risk of a lifetime of health problems, developmental issues and addiction. It's up to us to make sure that children overcome these stresses and have the nurturing experiences they need for positive development.
Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across a net, various forms of communication pass between the two, from eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. If a child is exposed to serious ongoing hardships like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support, the basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he is at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place. One of the things building sturdy brain architecture supports is the development of basic emotional and social skills, an important group of skills which scientists call executive function and self-regulation, can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower at a busy airport, all those planes landing and taking off, and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead, and remember and follow lots of rules. Like all of us, kids have to react to things happening in the world around them, while also dealing with worries, temptations, and obligations on their mind. As these demands for attention pile up, air traffic control helps a child regulate the flow of information, prioritize tasks, and above all, find ways to manage stress and avoid mental collisions along the way. Having this ability is a necessity for positive and level mental health. Developing effective air traffic control, overcoming toxic stress, and building solid brain architecture are things kids can't do on their own. And since strong societies are made up of healthy, contributing individuals, it's up to us as a community to make sure all young people have the kinds of nurturing experiences they need for positive development. To build better futures, we need to build better brains.
In this section, we consider the different types of stress and the trauma response. Starting with the positive stress. This is the body's normal and healthy response to stress and is essential for development. This is typically characterized by a brief increase in heart rate and mild elevations in hormones. For a baby, this refers to everyday experiences of feeling hungry, tired, or alone. A responsive adult responds promptly, offering the appropriate response to buffer stress. Other examples could be a child taking an exam or a test, going on stage for the first time, or taking part in sports. The child will learn to emotionally regulate and self-soothe. These are the building blocks to brain development. Tolerable stress activates the body's alert system to a greater degree as a result of more severe, longer-lasting difficulties, such as the death or serious illness of a loved one, a frightening accident, or an acrimonious parental separation or divorce. It is tolerable if this activation is time-limited and in the context of ongoing supportive relationships with adults. Having supportive relationships with adults, preferably the primary caregiver, can help a child to adapt and the brain to recover from what might otherwise be very damaging effects. Toxic stress can occur when this is frequent or prolonged adversity, such as physical abuse, emotional abuse, or family hardship. Prolonged exposure can affect brain development and other organs and increase the risk of stress-related disease and cognitive impairment well into adult years. This is exaggerated without supportive relationships, such as with a trusted adult or a primary caregiver, who would otherwise act as a buffer to this stress. This video clip demonstrates how toxic stress can impact brain development. This clip is taken from the documentary film Resilience, The Biology of Stress and the Science of Hope.
The reality is that we all need a certain amount of stress, a certain amount of anxiety to perform well. If we don't care about that exam that we're going to have tomorrow, we'll probably fail. If we're going to cross the street and a truck is coming at us, we have release of adrenaline. we have release of a hormone that we call cortisol. We want to jump out of there, and adrenaline and cortisol are going to help us do that. So there's that good amount of stress. But if all day long you're feeling like a truck is coming at you, day after day after day, that's going to take a toll on the body.
So the kid next to them hits them, or the teacher reprimands them in a way that they're uncomfortable with, right? Literally what they're feeling, that activation is like there was a truck coming at them.
Imagine that you see a bear while walking through the forest. In response to this threat, your body switches into fight or flight mode. To survive, your body releases emergency stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol that cause your heartbeat to quicken, make your eyes dilate, and focus your mind on the threat at hand. Everything you need to do to get your body ready to run or to fight back. When activated, occasionally the system bypasses our brain, the prefrontal cortex, and activates the primitive reactions that can get us out of the way of mortal threat. In situations like this, stress is helpful. It keeps you alive. The problem comes when our system is overtaxed by repeated, intense, or chronic stress. The cascade of chemicals and reactions goes from saving one's life to damaging one's health. Children are especially vulnerable to harmful effects of chronic stress and trauma. For many children who are repeatedly exposed to adverse childhood experiences, such as violence at home or in the community, or having a parent with a mental illness or substance dependent, their fight or flight system is activated so that it often stays on. These high levels of emergency hormones can lead to changes in structure and function of children's developing brains and bodies, and the result is toxic stress. Without support and protection from adults, children who experience toxic stress are at a higher risk for health and social problems like asthma, diabetes, and obesity, as well as learning difficulties. Toxic stress can also make it difficult to sit still in school or to control emotions. If left untreated, toxic stress can lead to increased risk of adult diseases, including heart disease and cancer. Thinking about this in terms of behaviours we may be presented with, children experiencing adversity may be seen as withdrawn, anxious, hot-headed, impulsive, hypervigilant, and children who have experienced toxic stress may display a heightened emotional state of anxiety, always ready to fight or flight, and consequently they could be distracted from educational pursuits, resulting in poor educational attainment. What are ACEs? ACEs are potentially traumatic events that can have negative lasting effects on health and well-being. These experiences range from direct physical, emotional, or sexual abuse of a child to environmental experiences such as parental separation, parental substance misuse, domestic violence, parental mental illness, or the incarceration of a parent or guardian. The concept of childhood trauma and its impact is not new for many services. The Welsh research around 9 ACEs and the work of the ACE Support Hub is providing a common language for a national conversation around ACEs, trauma and adversity, and is helping Wales to think differently about reducing the harm from ACEs. There are other childhood experiences that can be just as traumatic, and without the factors such as resilience resources, these can increase risk and negative outcomes in later life. ACEs can be transmitted from one generation to the next, and children raised in environments where violence, assault and abuse are common can mean that these behaviours are normalised and leave them more likely to commit violent acts or become the victim of such acts in adulthood. Public Health Wales carried out the first national survey of ACEs in Wales in 2015. This involved interviewing approximately 2,000 people aged between 18 to 69. The data from the survey on the exposure and prevalence of ACEs in the Welsh population resulted in 3 publications: ACEs and the Association with Health Harming Behaviours, ACEs and their association with mental well-being, and ACEs and their association with chronic disease and health service use. A second national ACEs study took place in 2017, and in addition to the 9 ACEs, emotional and physical neglect was measured for the first time. This report also examined sources of resilience in Wales and focused on the relationship with mental illness. This slide shows how many adults in Wales have been exposed to each ACE. Substantial proportions of the Welsh population have suffered abuse, neglect, and other ACEs during childhood. For example, 20% experienced verbal abuse, 16% experienced physical abuse, and 7% experienced sexual abuse. All ACEs are equally important. All ACEs can cause harm, and the more people suffer, the more vulnerable they potentially are. The impact that different ACEs have will vary based on length and chronicity of exposure and the resilience resources, the buffers that were available to people. This slide considers population-adjusted prevalence in terms of the number of ACEs experienced by the Welsh adult population. 50% are estimated to have experienced at least one ACE, and 14% have experienced 4 or more ACEs. It's important to note here that this data is population adjusted. ACEs cross every social boundary, and they don't just affect a certain group of people. It's not about people living in poverty, although we are aware that those living in higher deprivation are at greater risk of experiencing multiple ACEs. There are many studies that use counting the number of ACEs to give people an ACE score. The ACE Support Hub Wales are not suggesting that there is a need to screen or to give people an ACEs score. Experiencing 4 or more ACEs compared to no ACEs is strongly associated with an increased risk of adopting health harming and criminal behaviours. Compared with people who have no ACEs, those with 4 or more are 4 times more likely to be a high-risk drinker or 6 times more likely to smoke. Experiencing 4 or more compared to no ACEs is also strongly associated with an increased risk of becoming both a victim and perpetrator of violence. And it's worth emphasising that those who experienced 4 or more ACEs were 20 times more likely to be incarcerated at any point in their life compared to those who had no ACEs. This slide shows how much being exposed to 4 or more ACEs can increase the impact of mental well-being. Compared to people with no ACEs, people with 4 or more can feel 4 times more likely to have never or rarely been able to think clearly, 5 times more likely to have never or rarely been able to make up their mind about things, and 6 times more likely to have never or rarely felt useful. So if we think about this in the context of the services that we are designing to support people, if they have experienced ACEs and trauma and adversity, how well do we consider these impacts in terms of their ability to engage with our services? The Welsh ACE study measured exposure to ACEs in the Welsh population and their association with chronic disease development and health service use in adulthood. Adults who had an ACE score of 4 or more were 4 times more likely to develop type 2 diabetes, 3 times more likely to develop heart disease, and 3 times more likely to develop respiratory disease. The study also demonstrated the impact on health service use. This slide illustrates the impact of ACEs across the life course, starting from the bottom of the pyramid. Chronic traumatic stress in early life can alter how a child's brain develops and can fundamentally alter nervous, hormonal, and immunological system development. ACEs can set individuals on a suboptimal health and well-being trajectory from an early age. increasing the risk of developing social, emotional and learning problems, and adopting health-harming behaviours such as smoking, problem drinking, poor diet and risky sexual behaviour. In turn, such behaviours can lead to premature ill health through increasing risks of non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, heart disease and cancer. The same chronic stresses in early childhood can also lead to individuals developing antisocial behaviours, including a propensity for aggressive and violent behaviour and problems with criminal justice services. Individuals' engagement in education, their ability to gain qualifications, and their contribution to the economy can all be affected by the combination of antisocial behaviour, difficulties with social adjustments, and ill health. Ultimately, the cumulative impacts of ACE exposure, particularly multiple ACEs exposure, can increase the risk of early death. This is a video of Professor Gordon Harold, who is an expert in child psychological development. Here, Professor Harold explains the potential long-term high-risk outcomes and the importance of early intervention.
So we know that attachment is extremely important in the early years, but we also now know that the first 3 to 4 years of life where positive or negative attachment is positioned is not necessarily causal. So actually individuals who have adverse childhood experiences that do not promote positive attachment, that does not mean that they cannot improve or experience positive and positively directed attachment relationships later in life with the right type of support.
Next is a short animated film which has been produced by Public Health Wales and Blackburn and Darwen Local Authority to raise awareness of ACEs, their potential to damage health across the life course, and the roles that different agencies can play in preventing ACEs and supporting those affected by them.
My parents don't understand. All the drinking and fighting means I'm scared. I'd like a cuddle, perhaps a bedtime story, but mostly I'd like them to stop shouting at me, and sometimes they hit me. Feeling scared every day and not feeling loved or wanted will change me for the rest of my life. Later, I'll have problems with school, problems with alcohol, and I'll get in trouble with the police. What's happening to me right now means I'm more likely to have serious health problems in middle age and die sooner than I should. Doctors say my life is full of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. But in my world, this means I see my dad hitting my mum. Dad's got a drinking problem, and mum's always crying, even with the tablets. I'm always being shouted at and hit. After the booze and fags, there's not a lot of money for toys or clothes, or even food. I'm getting used to being scared all the time, but now I'm just angry. Doctors say things are changing inside me. My brain isn't learning how to control my feelings properly. My body can't relax like those kids who don't have ACEs, so my body won't be able to repair itself properly when I get older, making it more likely I'll get cancer or heart disease as an adult. It hurts when my parents hit me, but the real damage is hidden, and that damage will be with me for life.
I drink and smoke. They say I'm out of control, but I'm not. It's just my way of coping with my ACEs. I've been in plenty of fights, but what's wrong with that? Kids' punches done it half as much as when my dad hits me. I beat up a kid last week at school because he looked at me weird. Who cares? I ended up with more time out of school. Learning's not for me anyway, and the teachers don't care any more than my parents. I don't like the way anyone looks at me except my girl. She's 16 and pregnant, just like my mum was with me.
So this is where I've ended up. I've got diabetes and cancer is probably on the way. I know these kill you, but I couldn't do without them. I've never had a proper job and I've spent time inside. I hate my kids. I hate their mum too, until she left. So my kids have grown up with ACEs. And now my daughter had her first kid. She's 16. The course of my life was set in the wrong direction a long time ago. I know where I'm heading, and sadly I know where my kids are heading too. This doesn't have to happen. A little help in childhood makes a big difference to where life takes you. When I was a baby, the nurses noticed that my mum wasn't coping and helped her and explained how important my childhood is to the rest of my life. So, with a bit of help, she coped. The police came round after next door complained about the noise from Mum and Dad fighting. They asked how I was feeling. I told them I was scared all the time. Mum and Dad got help, the shouting got better and the hitting stopped. I even got some bedtime stories. I still had problems at school, but the teacher asked me about what was happening at home. I got help controlling my feelings. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough. I'm now married with 2 children and I've got a job. Most of the time. I haven't repeated the same problems with my kids. We got help when being a parent got too much. Our children are ACE-free, and that means their kids stand a good chance of growing up ACE-free as well. Almost half the people in England and Wales experienced 1 ACE as a child, and 1 in 10 of us suffered 4 or more ACEs. If we stop ACEs, millions of children would not become smokers or binge drinkers, and levels of violence in adults would be cut in half. Fewer ACEs in childhood also means fewer adults developing diseases like cancer, heart disease, and diabetes in middle age. We all need to be ACE aware. Are you? Doctors, police, nurses, teachers, firefighters, and most importantly, parents. The more you know about ACEs, the more you can help stop children growing up with ACEs in their lives. And for those of you who have already suffered ACEs, the more you know, the more you can help yourself and others who have suffered ACEs cope.
The impact of ACEs can last a lifetime, but they don't have to. Healing through safe, stable and nurturing relationships and other protective factors can occur. Protective factors build resilience, which is the lifelong process of enduring and growing through crisis and change. No one can prevent stress or crisis from happening to individuals and families at some point in time. ACEs are common and we can't remove all children from adversity, but we can build resilience, and these are the building blocks. If ACEs are the illness, then resilience is the defence. What were your protective factors growing up? Resilience is the ability to adapt well in the face of adversity. The most important factor to building resilience is having a relationship with at least one trusted adult during childhood. 3 approaches to addressing ACEs may be considered in terms of 1. Preventing exposure to ACE, stop it from happening in the first place, for example, through policy, early pregnancy intervention, prioritising parents for treatment, such as in substance misuse and mental health services. 2. Recognising risk and intervening early, through effective pregnancy and early childhood services, behaviour management and support in schools, supporting looked after children, investment in child and adolescent mental health services and youth offending services. And 3, treatment and care, for example, evidence-based therapeutic interventions, ACE-informed services, addressing the root causes and not the symptoms. Everyone can play a part. We must also consider how our organisations work and how our systems in Wales work to respond to ACEs. We need multi-agency working and ongoing to support to reduce trauma and to be ACE-informed. ACEs aren't another intervention, it's about working differently. What an ACE-informed approach means within a system, the elements must all work together. It's essential that the system shows kindness, compassion and understanding. What role could you play in addressing ACEs, and what could you do differently for greater impact? Here are some examples of the things that we can all do. Raise awareness of ACEs, spread the word, and be ACE-informed. Understand the impact of ACEs, and think about the impact you can have. Think about the root causes, not the symptoms and the behaviours. See the world from somebody else's perspective. Show compassion and being listened to. This can be a protective factor for those who've already experienced adversity. Make the link between physical and mental health and recognise the signs and symptoms of ACEs. Actively work to address ACEs. What practical approaches may be employed in your role? Remember, having a trusted adult relationship with at least one adult is essential in building resilience and can counteract the negative effect of ACEs. Promote self-care and resilience with individuals and communities, and establish safe places when working with people of all ages. Think about the principles of trauma-informed practice. Reflect on this alongside your own practice. I previously mentioned the principles of trauma-informed practice in relation to one of the ways individuals and communities can take action on ACEs. What does being trauma-informed mean, and what are the principles of trauma-informed practice? Being trauma-informed means recognising that trauma experiences are a possibility for anyone, incorporating knowledge of ACE and trauma into everything they do and taking into account an individual's life experiences. The principles of trauma-informed practice are safety, choice, collaboration, empower, and trust. Safety. This involves situations and environments where people feel emotionally, physically, spiritually, and culturally safe. Establishing safe places is an important step to building trusted relationships. Choice. This is about maximising opportunities that offer choice and control in order to promote healing and avoid re-traumatisation. Collaboration. Maximising collaboration and sharing power through providing an inclusive approach and creating opportunities for shared decision-making and ongoing feedback. Empower. Maximising opportunities which build on and validate other strengths, supporting individuals to take power for themselves and realise their individual strength. By using a strength-based approach, we recognise and build on people's strengths, abilities and resilience levels. Trust. Maximising trustworthiness through relationships, task clarity, consistency and interpersonal boundaries. Think about the principles of trauma-informed practice and reflect this alongside your own practice. Think about the relationships you have and will have with the services that you provide.
Hello, my name's Kelly McFadden and I'm the Training and Skills Development Lead for the ACE Support Hub for Wales. Building on the Introduction to ACEs session, which covered what we know about brain development in the early years, types of stress and the trauma response, ACEs studies around prevalence and exposure to ACEs in Wales, risks to population health and wellbeing across the life course, and how we can prevent and mitigate the impact of ACEs. I'm now going to invite you to reflect on this in the context of asylum-seeking and refugee populations. ACEs and asylum-seeking and refugee populations. Why is this important? A review was conducted by Public Health Wales to bring together what we know about ACEs in refugee and asylum-seeking children arriving and settling into host countries, highlighting their nature, extent and impact. The report was published earlier in 2020 providing an important contribution towards understanding the ways in which ACEs affect young sanctuary seekers. The stark findings collected in this report demonstrate the need for public services in Wales to be trauma and ACE informed. This will enable them to consider the steps they need to take to develop trauma-responsive approaches in delivering their services. Young sanctuary seekers contend with adverse experiences in their countries of origin, which often force them to flee. Journeys are grueling and involve further traumatic experiences. Finally, they arrive in the UK and claim asylum. But this report shows that they can experience further adverse experiences in the process of claiming asylum and when they seek to integrate into our communities. The better our understanding of ACEs and their long-term impacts among sanctuary-seeking children and adults, the more we are able to provide support to ensure these people can live happy, healthy and productive lives. The risk of ACEs occurs across the migration journey. By the time a displaced child arrives in a host country, he or she is likely to have experienced a multitude of ACEs, firstly due to their reasons for migrating. These include physical, emotional or sexual abuse within schools, communities or by authorities, witnessing violence towards others, experience of bombings and the destruction of homes, imprisonment or abduction, severe deprivation of basic necessities. They may also experience trauma and ACEs on their journeys to host countries. Journeys can often be lengthy and fraught with danger. There may be physical, emotional and/or sexual abuse by the authorities, smugglers and traffickers, or within the immigration systems, detention centres and refugee camps, and also witnessing violence towards others and lack of basic necessities. Other ACEs may have occurred within the household before migration or as a result of migration and may be ongoing. Subsequent ACEs can occur post-migration as children wait for asylum decisions, enter the care system or begin settling into a new community. Now think about the impacts on families, parenting and the risk of ACEs. The experience of migration and its causes can have direct impacts on the family unit. Adults with caregiving responsibilities are not exempt from the stresses associated with conflict and migration outlined previously, and are likely affected by changes in social, economic and living conditions in settled countries, as well as the stress of acculturation, of adapting to life within a different host culture. Furthermore, the challenges associated with migrating to and adapting to life in a host country can lead to parenting in transition, whereby individuals need to adapt to changing challenges and needs of parenting across different countries and cultures. These stresses can affect family functioning and in some cases increase the risk of children experiences ACEs such as neglect and child maltreatment within the family environment. Although this slide intends to demonstrate how refugee and asylum-seeking children may be affected by migration-related changes in the family, it also draws on studies of parents that migrated before their children were born. Migration and its causes can affect the family unit through affecting parental mental health. In some cases, this can reduce a parent's capacity to provide care or increase the use of harsh parenting and physical discipline. Affecting children's behaviour. Child behavioural problems associated with trauma or stress can increase the risk of physical discipline or punishment from parents. Also, concerns around child safety. In some cases, this can lead to increases in parental control, harsh parenting, or risk of child marriage. There's also changing family roles, and this can affect families in different ways, including having less ability to supervise children and increasing family and marital conflict. And then differences in acculturation rates between children and parents. This can cause intergenerational conflict, tension, and increased use of harsh parenting. Gender-based violence. Gender-based violence refers to violence directed at an individual based on gender norms and unequal power relationships ascribed by society. It can include physical, emotional, or sexual violence, threats of violence, coercion, or deprivation of liberty. The term is most often used to describe men's violence against women and girls. However, can also include violence against men and boys, such as violence based on sexual orientation, gender identity that does not conform to social norms, or violence used as an attack on masculinity. Certain factors increase the risk of poor mental health. These are cumulative adverse experiences. Arriving unaccompanied. These children are more likely to have multiple ACEs. Family or parental difficulties. Low levels of social support, including peer support. More system relocation. Despite the significant adversity associated with growing up in unstable environments characterized by conflict, disaster, and deprivation, and the substantial stresses present during transit and resettlement, many children seeking asylum in the UK do not show considerable levels of psychological harm. Instead, they present with an overriding willingness to succeed and a desire to overcome the challenges associated with establishing a new life in their host country. The process of effectively negotiating, adapting to, or managing significant sources of stress or trauma is known as resilience. Even in the face of prolonged or severe adversity, with enough of the right resilience resources, a person can maintain a relatively stable trajectory of healthy psychological, physiological, and cognitive and behavioural functioning. Such resilience resources are described on this slide. Personal attributes. Positive thinking, having a long-term vision, belief that life has meaning, pro-social behaviours. Family context, positive early attachment, good family functioning, extended family networks, good parental mental health. The larger social world, good peer relationships, safe and supportive schools, faith and religious involvement, community resources. So what does this mean for public services responding to the needs of asylum-seeking and refugee populations? The ongoing likelihood of ACEs in host countries is important to consider. For example, ACEs in family, in schools, in communities. Need for trauma and ACE-informed services along the pathway of support. Need to better understand the long-term impacts on health. The need to develop our understanding of resilience factors. How do we ensure that resilience is maintained over time? I'd now like to invite you to take a few moments to think about the following scenarios. Scenario 1. Every year it rains heavily. The village is flooded. Water will be at your house soon, and you will have to move again. You are staying with friends, but there are 8 other people in the house and it's crowded. A relative who lives in another country tells you it's better there because there's less flooding. What stress, what trauma can you identify in this scenario? How would you feel? What would you do in this situation? Scenario 2. It never rains where you live, and this means no food grows. Fresh water and shops are a 3-hour walk away. Food is scarce, difficult to source, and what food is available is expensive. Like you, many people in your community are hungry. What stress, what trauma can you identify in this scenario? How would you feel? What would you do in this situation? Scenario 3. There has been an outbreak of war in your country. You witness violence every day. You can hear guns and bombs every night. Lots of people in your community have already left. Some have been recruited to become soldiers. Your neighbourhood has been destroyed, with only a few houses left standing. What stress, what trauma can you identify in this scenario? How would you feel? What would you do in this situation?
انقدر میترسیدم از همه چی. آمدیم در کوها تا زانوی ما پایای یخ زده بود، اصلا نمیتونستم راه برم. نفسم بالا نمیومد، فکر میکردم همینجا میمیرم.
رحت ودعت رفقاتي، اجا وقفنا الجيش السوري، قلت لهم عنا شهيد بالشو اسمه، لأنه صغير شايفيني صغير لحسدوني.
The big guns that I had, I've never had before. They were looting of people's properties, killing, raping, burning of houses. All this I witnessed with my eyes.
پدر و مادر ندارم. مادرم 6 سال قبل فوت کرده. اندازه یک آدم 25-26 ساله کار میکنه. به خوابم همچین چیزا رو فکر نمیکردم که همچین چیزا و همچین اتفاقا پیش میفته.
Desde que me ve a mí, dijo que él me llevaba hambre a mí, dijo. A esta chinita le vuela del ojo, dijo. Y cuando me quedé adentro, venía él con otro muchacho. Y incluso los dos abusaron de mí.
احنا بس وصلنا للمياه الإقليمية وقف البلد ما عاد اشتغل. وقتها هاج البحر وصارت تشتي علينا المطر كتير. متغيرة كتير كتير كتير، ما عم بثق بحدا. إنه كيف يعني الواحد إنه أول شي الغربة بتأسي القلب، الغربة بتأسي القلب.
كبنيرون زكاة من أشجر أب ليبيا 4 ورهي وفي نوم تمسجوينا قال تامات قبر مراتي هلا ساعتها مراتي
جبت معي لعبة بس ضاعت، دبدوب ولا ددو، عطوني يا رفقاتي بالمدرسة، ضيعته وإحنا عم نتهرب، ضيعته بالماء، كان في طين كتير بالأرض، وقع بالماء ما عاد شفته، كانت تحكي I love you وهيك شغلات، بعدين أهلي قنعوني عشان مستقبلك سافر وإحنا بنلحقك بعدين إن شاء الله.
time for reflection. What do the principles of trauma-informed practice mean to you? Thinking about all the information covered in this session and picking back up on the principles of trauma-informed care, which are safety, choice, collaboration, empowerment, and trust. I'd now like to invite you to reflect on the following questions. How can your service, how can your organisation maximise opportunities for the principles of trauma-informed practice? How can you, your service or your organisation help others build resilience? How will trauma and ACE awareness change you personally? How will it change your practice? The final section is about you. Being trauma and ACE informed is as much about workforce well-being and maximising opportunities for safety, choice, collaboration, empowerment and trust for the workforce as it is about those people accessing public services. It is about recognising that trauma and ACEs can be a reality for any one of us, and also that when working with trauma, we may be likely to be affected by this through secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. Ultimately, we may all be vulnerable to stress, and through taking care of ourselves, through fitting our own oxygen masks first, we can better respond to the needs of others and avoid burnout. Think about who looks after you. How do you cope with stress? How do you cope with secondary trauma? What support is provided by your organisation? What role do you have in helping yourself or others with their stress? There will be internal organisational support available to you, and there are a range of national agencies, helplines and services that you can access if you need to. A list has been provided at the end of this presentation.
Here are the details on how to contact us and to find out more about the work of the Hub. Thank you for joining the session today.